I never expected to see my name on a six-figure loan document, let alone one for nearly $1 million. I thought things like that happened in television dramas, not to women like me who clipped coupons and kept handwritten grocery lists. I'd always believed that trust, once earned, was unshakable. But betrayal has a funny way of slipping in quietly, wearing a familiar face. And in my case, it came from someone I once cradled like my own child. What began with a quiet phone call from the bank ended in headlines. Not for vengeance, but for mercy. I've lived in the same little cottage on the outskirts of town for more than 40 years now. It's nothing grand, just 3 rooms and a screened-in porch where the wind chimes tinkle on breezy afternoons. But it's home. The walls are soft yellow, worn from age, and the garden out front blooms with wild lavender and marigolds every spring. Harold planted them. He always said flowers were nature's way of reminding us that beauty returns, even after hard winters. My name is Jessica. I'm a retired schoolteacher, a widow for over a decade now, and someone who still makes her own jam and hangs laundry on the line when the sun is high. Life hasn't always been easy, but it's been full. The kind of full that doesn't make headlines. Just the quiet, steady kind that fills the heart. Harold was the love of my life, a kind man, gentle to the core, who could build anything with his hands and fix almost anything with his words. He passed 12 years ago this autumn. Cancer. It was quick and cruel, but he faced it the way he faced everything. With grace, with humor, and with one hand always in mine. He never liked to leave things unsaid. The last thing he whispered was, "Take care of her, Jess." And I knew who he meant. Monica. Monica wasn't my daughter by blood, but I raised her as though she was. Her mother, Anna, was my best friend since childhood, practically a sister. We grew up riding bikes down the same gravel roads, sharing school notebooks and secrets, staying up too late giggling in sleeping bags. When Anna died in a car accident, Monica was just 10, a quiet, delicate girl with big brown eyes that always seemed to be searching the room for something steady to hold on to. I became that steady thing. I never legally adopted her. There was never a courtroom declaration, no formal paperwork filed. But none of that mattered. Everyone in town knew she was mine. I was Mom to her in everything but name. Raising Monica filled a space in me I didn't know was still empty. We made routines. Blueberry pancakes on Sundays, bedtime stories even when she said she was too old for them. I packed her school lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside. I sat beside her during every fever, every tear, every heartbreak. When she got her acceptance letter for community college, I cried harder than she did. Harold and I paid her tuition, gave her a car that barely made it over 60 miles an hour, and helped her find her first apartment in the city when she got a job offer. I remember standing in the empty kitchen of that apartment, placing a set of chip dishes into the cabinets and saying, "Don't forget, you can always come home." She promised she wouldn't. At first, she came back often. Thanksgiving, Easter. A few surprise weekends in between. She always brought little things. Candles I'd never light, refrigerator magnets from places she'd traveled. But over time, the visits became fewer, the calls shorter, birthdays turned into text messages, then just likes on Facebook. I didn't blame her. Life gets busy. The city moves faster. I told myself that this was just what happens when kids grow up. I never mentioned the silence. I just kept the porch light on, like always. Still, there were signs, little things that poked at the corners of my peace. One morning, I found a letter in the mailbox, a pre-approved credit card offer addressed to me, but with my name misspelled, Jessica Harold. Strange, I thought. I've never gone by Harold's last name. Maybe just junk mail. Then, a week later, I got a phone call while pruning the hydrangeas. It was a man from some mortgage company, asking if I had any questions about my new condo loan. I laughed out loud, assuming it was one of those scam calls. "Sir," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead, I haven't bought a thing since my last trip to the grocery store. He seemed confused, even a bit offended. It says here the application was finalized 3 days ago. Is this not Mrs. Jessica May? It is, I said, my heart tapping a little faster. But I haven't applied for anything. He apologized and hung up. I went back to the garden, brushing it off. Maybe it was a clerical error. These things happen. But they kept happening. The next week, another letter came. This one from a bank I didn't even have an account with. Thick envelope, official seal, my full name printed neatly across the front. It didn't feel like junk mail. My fingers hesitated before tearing it open. Inside was a welcome packet, congratulating me on the successful approval of my mortgage loan in the amount of $60,000. The address listed wasn't mine. The terms were 30 years, with a monthly payment that exceeded my yearly income. There was a signature line, signed with my name. It even had my social security number printed at the bottom. I sat down slowly on the edge of the kitchen chair, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. I read it again, and again. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't applied for anything. I hadn't even been to the city in over 6 months. I don't own a condo. I don't want a condo. For the first time in a long time, a sharp panic bubbled in my chest. Not the kind of fear that comes from the unknown, but the kind that comes from knowing something is deeply wrong, and yet you don't know where to even begin untangling it. I thought about calling the then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or fear, or the stubborn belief that this was all just some bureaucratic hiccup that would sort itself out. But by evening, the worry had grown roots. I called the bank and spent half an hour navigating robotic prompts and hold music before I finally spoke to a human voice. The man on the other end asked me to confirm my name, my address, the last 4 digits of my social security number. I did. All of it matched. Then he said, almost casually, "Mom, the loan was approved in person. All documentation was verified at our main branch office. You brought in your birth certificate and 2 forms of ID." I didn't bring in anything, I said quietly. I haven't been in your branch. I don't even have an account with your bank. Then he was a long pause. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Let me escalate this." I hung up the phone and sat in silence, the ticking of the wall louder than it had ever been. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering early autumn leaves across the yard. Inside, something deeper was unraveling. Who would do this? Why would anyone take out a loan in my name? And for such an outrageous amount? That night, I couldn't sleep. I made tea. I read an old mystery novel. I paced the hallway and stared out the window. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every memory started to blur. I thought of Monica, not because I suspected her. Not yet. But because she was the only person who'd ever had access to my old documents. My birth certificate was kept in the blue metal box in the back of the bedroom closet. Only 2 people in the world had ever known where it was, me and Monica. No, I shook the thought from my mind. She was family. She was my girl. She wouldn't, would she? The truth, I would soon learn, was far more complicated than I could have imagined. And the consequences would stretch far beyond bank statements and signatures. Because when trust is broken by the one person you gave your whole heart to, fixing the numbers is easy. It's fixing the silence that comes after that nearly undoes you. I don't remember standing up. One moment I was holding that letter at my kitchen table, the letter confirming a mortgage I never asked for. And the next, I was just moving. I walked to the sink, then sat back down, then stood again. The letter was still in my hand, slightly crumpled from how tightly I'd been gripping it. $960,000. I hadn't signed any loan. I hadn't even been to the city in months. The most I'd borrowed recently was a casserole dish from Ruth across the street. My first thought, of course, was identity theft. That some stranger, faceless and cruel, had somehow accessed my information. The idea chilled me, and not just because of the numbers. I'd always lived a quiet life, done everything by the book. Paid bills on time, shredded old documents, trusted no one but the postman with sensitive mail. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. I dialed the customer service number on the letter and braced myself for the maze of robotic voices and number menace. I sat on hold for nearly 45 minutes. The music was chipper, cheerful, an odd soundtrack to the anxiety curling in my stomach. When a man finally answered, I gave him every piece of information he requested: my full name, my address, the last 4 digits of my social security number. My voice quivered, and I hated that. I'd always prided myself on being composed. He paused, typing something on his end, then said in a neutral tone, "The loan application was submitted in person, with full documentation, including your birth certificate." I froze. "In person?" I repeated. "We're our downtown branch, Mom. 2 weeks ago." That was impossible. I hadn't left this town in over 6 months. Not since Mildred's 80th birthday luncheon. "Can you verify the documents used?" I asked. He hesitated. "For privacy reasons, I can't share copies over the phone, but you're welcome to visit the branch to speak with the original loan officer." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat very still. It was almost dinner time by the time I moved again. I didn't eat. Just stood at the window, staring at the garden Harold had built, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. The next morning, I gathered every form of ID I had. My license, my utility bills, even Harold's old property deed, and made the 2-hour drive into the city. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ruth, not the church ladies, not even Father Matthew. I couldn't yet bear the thought of saying the words aloud. The city felt noisier than I remembered. I parked in the underground garage, rode the elevator up, and walked into the sleek marble lobby of the bank. A young man in a pressed blue vest greeted me. I asked for the loan officer by name, the one mentioned in the letter. He looked confused at first, then led me to a small glass-walled office. The woman inside stood when I entered. Her name was Clarice. Mid-30s, polite smile, clipped tone. I explained everything slowly, clearly. "I believe someone used my name and documents to open a mortgage I never authorized. I'd like to see the paperwork, please." The Clarice looked hesitant but pulled up a file on her screen. Then she reached into a drawer and retrieved a physical folder. She laid it in front of me. There it was, my name, my social security number. A copy of my driver's license, not the one in my purse, but a slightly older version from years ago. My birth certificate, folded in half. All of it neatly arranged, stamped, and signed. I looked at the signature line. It was mine, or close. The curve of the J, the loop on the A. Someone had studied it carefully. "I never signed this," I whispered. Clarice narrowed her eyes. "Are you saying someone impersonated you in person?" "Les, that's concerning." I was present for the final verification, and I recall the applicant being physically here. I stared at her. "So you saw her face?" Clarice paused, then turned to her computer. "One moment." She clicked through a few folders, then angled the screen toward me. "This is from our security feed, the day of the appointment." I leaned in. There, in grainy black and white footage, was a woman sitting across the desk. Her back was mostly turned, but then she shifted, and I saw her face. My breath caught. The woman on the screen wasn't a stranger. It was Monica. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail, her blazer too stiff for her usually casual style. But it was her, my Monica. The girl I'd raised, the one who clung to my cardigan during storms, who once begged me not to leave her alone at ballet practice. I stared at the screen until Clarice said gently, "Do you know her?" I stood without answering, picked up my documents, and left. The drive home felt twice as long. I didn't cry. Not at first. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my breath. I kept replaying it in my head. Her face, the documents, the signature that looked like mine. She had my birth certificate. Of course she did. I'd kept it in the blue box in my closet, the one Monica used to dig through as a teenager when she was bored. I remembered her showing up at the dinner table once with Harold's old military badge, asking what it was. I remember smiling, saying, "Careful with that box. It holds pieces of our life." She must have taken it then. The next few days blurred. I didn't tell anyone. I answered phone calls with hollow politeness. I baked bread I didn't eat. I watered the plants too much. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how the child I'd raised could do this to me. I thought about going to the police, about lawyers, about news reports and courtrooms and ruined reputations. But more than anything, I thought about Monica's small hands slipping into mine when she was 10 years old, the way she once whispered, "You feel like home." I needed answers, so I went looking for her. I drove back to the city and parked in front of the office building where she worked. A glass-fronted real estate agency, all modern and sterile. I stood across the street for 20 minutes before going in. The receptionist smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Monica Ray." "Oh, she's out for the day. Can I leave her a message?" I shook my head. "No, thank you." I left nothing. Not my name, not my number. Just walked out again, heart pounding. Back home, I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight. The betrayal settled in me like a slow poison. I tried to sue, but my fingers trembled. I tried to read, but the words blurred. My neighbors waved as they walked past, and I smiled politely, even as my insides were twisting. In town, everyone knew me as calm, steady, the woman who organized charity bake sales and dropped off soup when someone's father passed. But inside, I was breaking. Because I wasn't just losing money, I was losing someone I thought was my daughter. And I didn't know how to begin grieving that. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, while I was pruning the roses, my phone rang. I saw her name, Monica. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. "Hey, Jess," she said too cheerfully. "Just wanted to say hi. How's your garden this year?" I kept my voice even, growing, slowly. A pause. She filled the silence. "I was just thinking about you. Wanted to check in." I waited a moment before I asked, "Did you buy something recently?" There was a pause. Slight, but enough. "Why do you ask?" she said lightly. I looked out at the fading sunlight. "Because the bank thinks I did, and they think I owe them just under $1 million. Silence. For a long moment, all I could hear was her breathing. Finally, she spoke. "Jessica, I was going to tell you. I just needed time. I was desperate. I'll fix it, I promise. Please don't be mad." My heart cracked. "Why didn't you just ask me?" I asked softly. Another silence. Then, "Because you would have said no. And I thought, you had enough to spare. You always have." Her words hung in the air. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "I spared everything for you. My time, my savings, my years." But I didn't. I just stared at the roses and whispered, "You didn't even ask." She started crying. Or pretending to cry. I wasn't sure anymore. I just thought I could flip it. The condo. My boyfriend said it was a smart investment. We were gonna sell it in 6 months. Make $100,000. I didn't think you'd get involved. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't say anything. Eventually, she said, "Are you going to press charges?" I hung up. Then I sat in the garden until dawn. The wind was soft that night, and the silence was louder than any courtroom verdict could ever be. I suppose it would have been easier if Monica had been a stranger, if the woman who'd taken nearly $1 million in my name had been faceless, or even just someone I knew in passing. A neighbor's niece, or a former student gone astray. Then perhaps I could have filed the paperwork without hesitation, without crying in the dark or staring at my teacup for hours. But it wasn't like that. It was Monica. The girl I'd once carried to bed after she fell asleep on the living room couch, her fingers still clutched around her spelling book. The girl who used to braid my hair with pink ribbons and bring me burnt cookies she swore were edible. The girl Harold and I both whispered about when we thought no one was listening. How lucky we were to have her, how she saved us from the quiet that comes after grief. And now, she'd left me in a different kind of silence. The day after our last phone call, I sat on my porch swing long after the sun had gone down, the air thick with late summer heat. Crickets chirped. A single moth banged against the porch light. My house, my name, my peace, all entangled in something I never asked for. I knew what I had to do. I had to protect myself. But that didn't make it easier. So the next morning, I drove to a local attorney. His office was tucked between the bakery and the pharmacy on Main Street, the kind of place with dusty windows and legal degrees yellowing in their frames. His name was Mr. Culver. He'd been in town forever, helped me write Harold's will years ago. He greeted me gently, with that cautious tone people use around the recently betrayed. "I read about the loan, Jessica," he said as we sat across from each other. "I'm so sorry." I nodded. I didn't need sympathy. I needed options. "There are really two paths here," he began. "First, you file a criminal report. Identity fraud, forged documents, theft. Once it's in the court system, the loan gets nullified. It will take time, but legally you'll be in the clear." "And the other path?" I ask. "You don't press charges. You handle it civilly. You'd still need to contest the loan, but the burden of repayment wouldn't fall on you immediately. It would take longer, be messier, and the bank might come after you anyway. So either I put her in jail," I said slowly, "or I live with this debt hanging over my head." He didn't answer. Not directly. Just folded his hands and waited. I left the office with a pamphlet on fraud and a headache that stretched all the way to my jaw. The next morning, the story broke. Someone at the courthouse had leaked the preliminary filing, and by noon, it was everywhere. Our town wasn't exactly brimming with headlines, so when one landed, it echoed. Beloved retired teacher victim of six-figure identity fraud. By her own ward. I stood at the kitchen sink, listening to the radio broadcaster repeat it twice, her voice lilting with disbelief. I turned it off. The next few days were a blur of doorbells, whispers, and pitying glances. Reporters showed up at my gate, holding microphones and fake smiles. "Ems, Jessica, do you have a statement? Were you surprised? Is the young woman in question your daughter?" I didn't answer them, just closed the curtains and turned off the porch light. For the first time in years, even my neighbors, the kind ones, didn't know what to say. Ruth brought over banana bread. Carl mumbled something about young people these days. And Diane, the pastor's wife, suggested I host a prayer circle for strength and clarity. I didn't want clarity. I wanted my life back. Monica went silent. No calls, no messages, no signs. The last thread between us had snapped. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Whatever it was she had bought with my name. The life she tried to create. So I went to the condo. It was downtown, glass and steel, perched near the river where all the new development was happening. Expensive. Modern, cold. I signed in with the concierge, who looked bored, and rode the elevator to the 16th floor. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was staged. As if someone had tried to make it look lived in, but never quite got around to living. White walls. Sleek furniture. No pictures. No clutter. No warmth. There was a single wine glass in the sink, a half-dead plant on the windowsill, and on the counter, a pile of unopened envelopes, past due notices, maintenance fees, tax warnings. And then, near the fireplace, I found it. A piece of notebook paper, torn at the top, crumpled, and half tucked under a glossy magazine. The writing was unmistakably hers. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to be someone. I thought this would change everything." I sat down on the edge of the couch, note in hand, and read it again. And something shifted in me. I remembered Monica at 10, standing in the hallway outside her mother's funeral, too scared to go inside. I remembered the way she flinched when people hugged her, like love was something you had to brace yourself for. I remembered how she'd ask, "Do I have to go to school?" on days when she felt invisible. She hadn't changed. Not really. She was still that little girl, trying to build herself into someone worth loving. Still chasing approval in the shape of square footage and designer light fixtures. And she'd gambled my trust, my name, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this time the world would see her. But now the condo sat hollow. Like her. Like me. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my purse. Then I walked through the apartment one more time. Touched the edge of the kitchen counter. Looked out the wide windows to the skyline. Then I locked the door and left. It was late afternoon when I pulled into the police station parking lot. I sat in the car for a long time. The building was squat and beige, with a single flag waving out front and a bench where someone had left a half-eaten sandwich. I walked inside. The air smelled like floor cleaner and printer ink. A young officer at the front desk smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I reached into my bag. My fingers found the folder Mr. Culver had given me. The one with all the documents I needed to begin pressing charges. I held it for a moment. Then I let it go. "No," I said softly. "I just needed directions." I turned around and walked back out into the sun. Because in that moment, I realized something. Revenge would only stretch the silence between Monica and me wider. Justice might clean my name, but it wouldn't heal either of us. And deep down, I didn't want her behind bars. I wanted her to learn, to grow, to face what she'd done and carry it like a scar, not a sentence. Some people might call that weakness, others, foolishness. But to me, it felt like choosing peace. I didn't file the charges. But I didn't stay silent, either. When I got home from the police station, I sat at my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I thought for a long time before I started writing. The words had to be careful. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed people to understand. I didn't want pity. I didn't want outrage. I wanted something deeper. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, the letter was finished. 2 days later, I called the town hall and asked to reserve the meeting room. "For a personal statement," I said. "It won't take long." The woman on the phone hesitated, then said, "Yes, of course, Ms. Jessica. We'll set up chairs." A word spread fast. When I arrived that Friday evening, the room was already half full. Reporters with cameras, students I hadn't seen in years, town council members, neighbors, even Ruth from down the street, holding a pie dish wrapped in foil. They all looked at me like they weren't sure what I was going to say. Some expected fire, others expected tears. But I wasn't there to give them either. I walked to the small podium at the front and unfolded my letter. My hands didn't shake, not even once. "My name is Jessica," I began. "Some of you know me as a retired teacher. Some of you as a neighbor, a friend, a woman who used to sit on the same bench every morning with her late husband, watching the world go by." A small, sad smile crossed my lips. I let it sit there a second longer before continuing. "Recently, I discovered that a young one I helped raise took out a loan in my name. A very large one. She used it to buy an expensive condo. To build a life that, in her mind, made her feel worth something." The room was silent. Even the reporters had lowered their cameras. "She took something from me that cannot be measured in money. Something I never thought I'd lose. Not to her. Trust." I paused. "But I have chosen not to press charges. Not because I am naive. Not because I excuse what was done. But because revenge is not the story I want to live." Some people stirred. A few gasps. One woman near the back covered her mouth. "I'm not telling this to make anyone feel sorry for me. I'm telling it because I believe we have to stop teaching people that their value comes from what they own. That success is a price tag. That status is a cure for emptiness. She made a terrible mistake. One that hurt me deeply. But I see now that she was not trying to ruin me. She was trying to find herself. And she chose the wrong way. I folded the letter. My voice stayed steady. I want this to be a lesson. Not just for her, but for anyone who believes their worth must be borrowed, stolen, or proven with things. We are not our debt. We are not our furniture. We are not our bank statements. I looked at the crowd. Some were nodding. Others just stared. Thank you, I said quietly, and stepped down. The aftermath was strange. Some called me brave. Others called me foolish. The local news ran the story again, this time with phrases like, grace in the face of betrayal, an unusual act of forgiveness. I turned off the TV. I didn't need their opinions. I'd already made peace. Monica didn't return right away. Weeks passed. Then a month. I heard nothing. Until one evening. A soft autumn dusk. I walked out onto my porch and found her sitting on the steps. She didn't say anything when I opened the screen door. Her shoulders were hunched, and her hands twisted in her lap. Her face was pale and drawn, eyes red like she hadn't slept. I sat beside her, the way I used to when she was younger and had nightmares. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her voice cracked on the last word. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Deep, shaking sobs that came from someplace old. Someplace she'd locked up years ago. I let her cry. The sun dipped lower. A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. Finally, she looked at me. I'll turn myself in, she said. You should have let them arrest me. I deserve it. I looked at her. At the same girl who used to scrape her knees running through my garden. The same girl who'd once fallen asleep with her head on my shoulder during a Christmas movie. The same girl who had, somewhere along the way, lost herself in wanting to be more than she thought she was. I don't need you to go to jail, I said quietly. I need you to live a better story than this. She stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I reached into my coat pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. A copy of the structured repayment plan Mr. Culver and I had drawn up. Nothing criminal, just financial, fair, firm. You're going to transfer the condo to my name. Then you'll get a job, and you'll start paying this back. Bit by bit, until your debt isn't just gone from the bank, but from you too. Monica nodded slowly. Her hands trembled as she took the paper. I don't deserve your kindness, she said. It's not kindness, I replied. It's choice. And so it began. She signed over the condo. She moved into a small apartment near the bus line. Took a job at the grocery store stocking shelves. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest. My lawyer helped her navigate the paperwork. Set up monthly payments. Nothing she couldn't manage, but enough to keep her accountable. And over time, Monica changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. She started volunteering at the town's literacy center on Saturdays, helping kids with reading and homework. She kept every receipt. Paid every bill on time. The bank called to tell me the first few payments had posted, then a few more. She never asked to move back in with me. And I never offered. Some lines, once crossed, don't fully fade, but they don't have to stay as scars either. Instead, we began a new rhythm. I visited her occasionally, never unannounced. Sometimes with a bag of cookies, sometimes with nothing but tea and silence. We didn't talk about the loan, or the condo, or the news articles. We talked about books, about work, about how the town was changing. And in those small shared moments, something fragile began to rebuild. Not the old trust. That was gone, but a new kind of understanding. One rooted in truth. People still ask me how I could forgive her. Why I didn't punish her. Why I gave her another chance. The truth. Because we are all more than our worst decisions. And sometimes, the greatest justice isn't punishment. It's transformation. Some people say forgiveness is weakness. I don't believe that. Forgiveness is just the name we give to the courage it takes to walk forward without dragging the weight of someone else's mistakes. I didn't want headlines. I wanted healing. And though we may never be the same, Monica and I have chosen peace over punishment. If you've ever faced a betrayal like this, if you've ever stood at the edge of hurt and had to decide who you wanted to be, share your story, or simply leave the word that carried you through. For me, that word is grace.